subconsciously I made a decision that being rich is going to solve all my problems.
A rich person knows that's not true because they make a ton of money and they're still miserable.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to the Money Hole Podcast. I'm so excited for my guest and friend today. Please make sure to like, subscribe, or drop a question into the comments. Kris, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm so grateful for you to do this. And for people that don't know you, I've got a lot of different people that listen to our podcast and watch it. But you're a pastor, a dad, a granddad.
Yeah, I am.
You're a business guy, and you wear a lot of hats from Monday through Sunday.
Yeah, we were in business for 20 years, running our own businesses. And 7 years before that, we ran a couple of repair shops for a guy, same guy actually. And then I came to Bethel Church and became the senior associate leader there. Now I oversee pretty much everything, all the business for sure, oversee all the business there.
That's awesome. And I forgot author. And I wanted to bring that up because I have read a couple of your books.
Well, that's good. You should read them all.
I will. The one that I always go back to the most, and we'll talk about today, is Poverty, Riches, and Wealth. And
yeah.
Where does that book rank on your list of books you've wrote? Because for me, that's such a powerful book.
16 books. It's probably my fifth or sixth, as far as selling list,
Yeah.
It's probably maybe the one or maybe top three and the closest to my heart because it's, the first part of it, the first half of the book is talking about the spiritual dynamics of money, because Christians are they're either kind of the prosperity gospel, which is kind of like your spirituality is measured by what you have.
Yep,
that's one extreme, or the poverty gospel, which is aren't we supposed to not have anything? And Jesus was poor, and so the first half of the book is kind of dealing with that, and then the second half of the book is really practical. Like I wanted to give people practical perspectives on, how do I actually build wealth? Like not riches, but wealth, which in my mind, riches and wealth, I separate them in the book. Like riches is like when you're just living for money. Wealth is when you have a healthy, wholesome approach to things.
Yep.
And a healthy, whole approach to the kingdom.
Yeah. And that's why I was struggling. I really didn't know what I was doing when I started a podcast, just so you know.
Yeah.
I just turned on a
None
camera.
Of us did.
Yeah. I know. I'm just starting to learn that now. And so even coming up with the title, Money Hole, it was, a bunch of my friends have made fun of me with that name. But the reason I came up with that is because I've been a business coach for a while now. And I usually coach somewhere between 9 to 12 people a month. And many of them are multimillionaires, and I've spent a lot of time with people that are upper middle class and have money. And one of the things I've noticed is you've got all these people who on the outside, they have it all, but I mean, they're having an affair.
Yeah.
They're addicted to drugs and alcohol and they're totally not whole.
Yeah.
And they're not wealthy.
Yeah.
They have money, but they're not wealthy. And then on the flip side of that, you see people who don't have money and they might be completely, and I think you said this in your book, you give some comparisons. I think you said people with $100,000 body and I always say, and the repo cars driving around their house looking for their car.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? And so I love how, and I wasn't here to talk about your books, but the book is so good because, and I've sent it to a few friends, as you know, because I think it's just so, you say spiritual, but it's so just truth. It's so much of it's just like truth. And one of the things that a lot of the people I talk with struggle with is their belief around money. Yeah. And they think that, like you said, man, they think they have weird things that they think about it that leave them broke and not figuring out that they can actually go out and make a difference. And so I'd love to ask you a couple of questions about that, man. So at what point did you make a decision or kind of have like an Epiphany, because I know your story, and you didn't always have money. No. You weren't always stewarding. Mostly didn't, yeah. Right? You weren't always stewarding $120 million building budgets and talking with city leaders. Mm-hmm. What happened where you realized that this is an important thing and it's not bad, it's not good, it actually has no power at all?
Well, first of all, I have to go back to say, when I grew up poor, So I'd say, American poor. So, we have third world countries. You and I both been to third world countries where we're talking about poor, like people don't have food. So always had food on the plate, and I always had a great mom, but grew up poor, and always on the school list for free lunches, and stood in line. Didn't realize till I got to about fifth grade that not everybody was in line for free lunches.
Yeah, this is not actually cool.
Exactly. It's not cool. And then super embarrassed about it. And by the time I was I'd say sixth grade, I hated being poor. I hated it because of the stigma. It probably at that time wasn't about money. It was about the fact that I'm the kid standing in line.
Yeah.
And got free lunches. And my mom was, she was ironing patches on my pants, on my jeans, and, not buying Levi's, buying when you start to care about what you wear and how you look, and you start to, look at girls and, you realize you're kind of the guy out.
Yeah.
And so we hated wealthy people. I can still just recall, like it was yesterday, my parents being around the dinner table. As you're a kid, you're listening to just sitting and listening, and they're talking about how wealthy people, they stole from people, and it'd be like in those days it wouldn't be Bill Gates, but it'd be like those kind of people. They're all crooks, and so I grew up hating them, and then I got saved when I was 18. And I had a radical conversion with the Jesus people, and didn't realize it, but I went from poverty mentality into the Jesus people movement, which was really honestly a beautiful movement. I don't want to cast any shadow on that, but I got saved into a movement that spiritualized being broke.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know it because I had never read the Bible before. And I ran with people who, if you had money, you were like, well, you haven't given it all to Jesus. And Jesus was broke.
Yep.
And the disciples were broke. And Jesus, we had some pet scriptures, like the rich man's story. It's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Like that was like, honestly, I know it sounds funny, but it's kind of almost like our mantra.
Yeah.
Like our mantra.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of sermons on that one.
Oh, yeah. I heard a lot of sermons.
I'm sure you've heard a few more.
And those verses, and the love of money is the root of all evil. When didn't usually say the love of money, it'd be money is the root of all evil. So, that's how I grew up. So into my, and so we had businesses, 9 businesses.
Yeah.
Over 20 years. And I never realized until actually I came to Bethel after we got out of business, sold our businesses. And probably the second or third year I was at Bethel, I had an encounter with the Lord. And the Lord said to me, I raised you, I called you to be a prince, but you're a pauper. And you don't know who you are. And the Lord began to talk to me about my identity. And began to strip away decades of garbage that I believed about me, about God. And he said, you know why Moses had to be raised in Pharaoh's house? I'm like, no. He said, because a man who's in slavery internally cannot free people who are in slavery externally. So it was necessary for Moses to be raised as a prince so he could free my people.
Wow.
But he said, unlike Moses, you were raised to be a pauper, a slave. And it's time for you to change because you're a son of a king, and not just a king, but the king. And over a period of, still is unfolding, but over a period of 13, 14, 15 months, it was like someone took me and turned me inside out and shook all of this garbage out of my life. Bad doctrine, low self-esteem hidden in pockets and crevices and rooms in my heart, ways I saw myself and I realized that night, when I had that encounter, I never have liked myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the beginning. And I feel that was 24 years ago. I feel like I'm still in the process because I still see areas in my life that I encounter certain things and it makes me feel like a small grasshopper.
Yeah.
And I have to remind myself, like, I'm a son of the king.
Mm-hmm.
And not in an arrogant way, like, I am so powerful, I'm just the man. Not that. Like, behave like you're noble.
Mm-hmm.
And please stop acting like you're a pauper. You are not. Whether you have things or not have things, that matters not.
Right.
But how you think of God and how you think of yourself really determines if you're going to love yourself.
Yeah, that's man, my story is so similar to yours. I was in those same lunch lines. I wore those same jeans. And for me, when I was around that time, I didn't consciously make this decision, but subconsciously I made a decision that being rich is going to solve all my problems. Like that's the key to happiness, right? So early in my career, like I was very driven, and it changed for me when I started realizing like, no, that's not what it means to be a son of the king. Because by this time I was saved as well. I was sober. I was running with some really great people, and I was just so confused about how to manage this whole beast of money. But it's such an important topic, Kris, because people don't talk about this stuff enough. You know, I'm in a very transparent community with coaching, and the one that you're aware of with all my friends. So we actually do talk about our money, and it's a unique thing because there's not a lot of like he's doing better than me or he's doing worse than me, because like we're on an even playing field, and we're just trying to help each other, you know. But that's not normal, especially in the church. I mean, you have a lot more experience than I do, but from my experience in the church and what I hear from others, like that's just not something people talk about, which I think is to a lot of people's detriment.
Yeah, sex and money, two things you don't talk about, much. And you said something that really reminded me of this. I've said this for probably 9 or 10 years. A rich person has an incredible advantage over a poor person, but not the advantage that people think they have. Because a rich person knows that when they get rich, it doesn't solve their problem, and they're not happy.
Right.
But a poor person like you and me, we always think, if I had stuff, if I didn't have debt, if I had nice clothes, if I had a nice car, then I would like myself, and I would feel good about my life. And a rich person, not a wealthy person, a rich person knows that's not true.
Yep.
Because they make a ton of money and they're still miserable.
Yep.
And so the advantage that a rich person has over a poor person is pretty dramatic, because a poor person will spend their entire life chasing money, just sure that if they had the things that wealthy people have, that rich people have, that they would be happy.
Yep.
But the rich person's already been there and knows it's not true.
Yep.
And I think that people don't realize that and the one, maybe the biggest, one of the largest wake up calls people have with money, like whether it's in the world you live in or the world that I now live in, is that they end up in my office when they have money, and their marriage is just in a disaster. Their inner world they're addicted to things. They're trying to figure out why they had this big windfall. Maybe they sold their business for $10 million. Maybe they end up with a great idea that suddenly made, or they got this great job that gave them a $500,000 a year salary, and they did that for a few years, and now they're like, it's now the reality. The reality hits that I've been making this amount of money for a long time, and I am so miserable.
I hate my life.
Yeah. And I don't know what to do, because my solution was work hard, get stuff,
get security, provide for my family. The intentions may not have even been bad.
No, not evil.
They're clean intentions, but you get to the other side of that and you realize that it doesn't satisfy.
Or worse, now you're really in trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the hope is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're broke, you have this hope.
Mm-hmm.
There is an answer, right?
Yep.
Like when I get that, and so I have this drive to get that because I have this hope. But when I get to the top of the mountain and it's empty, frick, now what am I going to do?
Yep.
Because I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Because that was my solution.
Yep.
And probably I have some level of, fame or notoriety, if I'm fairly wealthy. I have other people that look to me because those people all think that I have a life that is better than theirs because I don't tell them that I'm super empty,
mm-hmm.
and they end up in my office.
Well, at least they end up in your office. I mean, it could be worse. When I went to the shooting school a few years back, and I'd been to a lot of men's retreats in my life, and I was talking to someone recently about it, and I was kind of cynical. Jay just said, "Hey, you should come," and I was like, "Okay, whatever, let's go." And I get up there, and it was all leaders up there, business leaders, few pastors, and guys who had a lot going on, and it was so refreshing for me to hear all these guys talking about how they were struggling in so many areas of their life, and they had so much to lose. And I think that's one of the hard parts for people that become successful is that they lose that ability to be vulnerable, and your ego or whatever it is starts kind of making you feel like you can't actually share what's going on in your life. So you got to go to the pastor and tell him. And I think that's one of the greatest things that I've learned in the last few years is that it doesn't matter how much money you can make, you can be vulnerable. And in fact, it's to your benefit and everyone around you that you are.
Yeah, you can't be vulnerable till you've come to the realization that your worth is not to do with how well you perform.
Totally.
And as long as you live in that illusion, you have to keep that illusion going, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love, Danny says intimacy means into me you see.
Mm-hmm.
And I am terrified that you're going to get to know me and know I'm a poser.
Yep.
And it's not because I'm a poser, it's because I think I'm a poser. And I think that if you got to know me, you wouldn't like me. You know why? Because I don't like me.
Mm-hmm.
And so until I come to a place where I like me, I'm not going to let you see me because I'm afraid that you'll reject me. So I reject you before you reject me. And I build cases against you. And I carried around a case file in my brain, all filed against. And the more I wanted you to like me, the bigger the case file was.
Mm-hmm.
So here's all the reasons why I don't like you.
Yep.
And actually, I really, really want you to like me, but I'm afraid that you're going to get to know me and you're not going to like me. So it hurts less if I reject you before you reject me.
Yeah.
And I do things, and the world is full of people who do things like, I'm not against tattoos, so let me be clear, but people tattoo their whole body.
Oh yeah.
And it's a great big, I'll reject you. You will hate me for my tattoos because I don't want you to hate me for who I really am.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want you to know who I really am. So I'll give you a reason to reject me. I will reject you first. And it's that we have a fatherless world now where people weren't loved in their home. Their father teaches them, your father teaches you that you're loved. Your mother teaches you honor. And if you don't have a dad, you grew up in this place where you don't know you're loved.
Yep.
And when you don't know you're loved, you're not going to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
So, I wear my armor everywhere.
Yep.
And then, I call it peeing on trees. The guys get together, they pee on trees, and I'll tell their best story. And it might have been 15 years ago. They're still talking about something they did 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And the other guys, they're telling their best story. And I'm like, you can just hear the clinging of the armor.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I remember those days.
I do too.
And I'm like, I don't want to participate in that. I've got a lot of wins and I got a lot of losses.
Mm-hmm.
I got more wins than most people because I'm old. And I got more losses than most people. I can relate to the guy I've had 2 nervous breakdowns.
Mm-hmm.
I worked 20 years in a business, sold it to someone and they went bankrupt and I lost everything, including my house. I mean, I know what it's like to be completely broke. I know what it's like to, not be able to get off the couch for 6 months. And there's no secrets in my life. Like I don't want people to love me for who I'm not.
That's a freedom.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a freedom. And it's so rare. I mean, I think that it feels like, and it could just be like my cerebral cortex seeing it now.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's more people now because of Brene Brown and the whole vulnerability movement that are starting to value it. That was
such a great TED Talk.
In her book, I mean, it was a catalyst for, I think, a whole generation. I mean, to the point that my business coach was recently getting coached by, I forget his name, the football coach of Notre Dame.
I don't follow.
I forgot his name, but he told him the other day, he said that vulnerability is the new invincibility.
Wow.
And I just thought that made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it does. What was her TED Talk was called? The Power of Vulnerability or something?
Courage or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. No, I think it feels so good. Like I'd rather you hate me for who I am than love me for who I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you love me for who I'm not, and then I have to put on the pretend. I have to try to be that person. Yeah. And I'm not that person. So then you leave and I still don't feel loved because I know that I put on a show for you.
Well, you also attract people that are like that.
Yeah.
When you're holding up a facade.
Yeah, you do.
So it's a bunch of people doing the same thing. And what I have found is the more authentic and vulnerable you are, if you get around people who don't have a lot of experience with that, it makes them feel. Sometimes it makes them feel free, because it's like they're not used to being around someone who's, maybe has some notoriety, is well known, and is so personable and like just raw and real and isn't putting on a show, and it's the same person they see here and there.
Yeah.
So I just think the world needs more of it. So, I want to talk to you about another thing. This is something I've been dealing with. My generation has some very interesting challenges right now. Mm-hmm. It's 2024, mm-hmm. We're heading into a very contested election that it's like watching a TV show or the craziest movie. We're dealing with inflation. It's coming down, but we had the greatest inflation in 40 years. We have a whole generation that has been raised on stimulus and free money. Mm-hmm. And now people are really struggling. 70% of
they've used up their free money.
Well, they've not only used that up, but they're now maxed out on their credit cards. Mm-hmm. And like if you look at the data right now of Gen X and a lot of millennials, it's heading for a brick wall, mm-hmm. financially. And so the message that I've been trying to help people with so much is like, listen, I'm not trying to say being rich is being happy, but if you can't trust our government, mm-hmm. to take care of you. You have to figure this out. Like you have to take, mm-hmm. responsibility. And I always try to show people how when everyone got the stimulus back in 2020, how that money went right through the hands of the people that got it and right back into the hands of the wealthy, because they went out and bought flat screen TVs. They went out and bought Apple computers. They went out and bought new cars. They refinanced their house. And like, I can show people on a graph, like everyone's like, the stock market's so high. I was like, yeah, because the stock market absorbed all the poor people's money that just didn't know how to do anything but spend it. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I have no problem talking about politics, because I think it's important. And right now we live with this illusion that everyone says, political correctness is like, no, this is just common sense. This isn't about a party right now, but we live in a very interesting time. And I just think that people my age and younger than me, they have to wake up to the reality that they can't depend on the government to take care of them, because they're not doing a great job right now.
Yeah, $36 trillion debt I heard yesterday.
Yeah, and it's accelerating like crazy right now.
It's so astronomical. It's hard. It would be hard for. I'm pretty good at math, and I'm like, I can't wrap my head around that number.
That's why it goes in one ear and out the other when people hear it, because it's just so big. It's like, well, that's not my problem, so I'm just gonna.
It's $120,000 per person.
Mm-hmm.
Per person.
Yeah.
I'm talking about babies to
8 billion people. Or no, that would be,
Yeah.
so like, what do we have?
367,000 people. Million people. 367 million people all owe $120,000.
Yeah.
Plus, and it's gaining interest.
Yeah.
So it's not like solid. It's like moving.
Yeah.
Yeah. A few things like about politics. I'll say this, like, the challenge about life is that there's the decisions that you get to make are good and bad. And I'll say that it's so amazing. It's so good when the decision in front of you as an adult is a good one or a bad one.
Mm-hmm.
I love those decisions.
Yep.
Those decisions are getting rarer and rarer.
Yep.
So it's like, do you want to vote for this person or this person? Which one's more Christ-like? I'm like, it's the political world has become, it reminds me of being on playground at 16 years old and calling each other names. And it's like, and so, one of my friends, I think I'll mention him, Michael Brown, yesterday said, he had, they have, on social media pops up like, answer this question, yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Donald Trump has Christ-like character? And I would have said the same thing if he would have said about Kamala Harris.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wrote, I don't think that's the question to be answered, because that means that I think that there's a black and white answer. Yeah. There's a right and a wrong person. There's a godly person and a not godly person. And I'm like, and it's, my point would be that we live in a world where those decisions are fewer and fewer.
Yeah.
And so, I have to sometimes decide. I often find myself as the senior leader at Bethel, by the time a decision gets to me, so the easy decisions get made by our team that are in the trenches. And as you go up to the supervisors and then up to the leaders, harder and harder. And when it gets to me, it's usually because there is no simple answer, like it's bad or worse.
Mm-hmm.
And then we live in a media world where media picks up on the decision you made and they go, that's a bad decision. I agree with that. But it never bring up in social media that the other decision I had to make was worse.
Yeah.
Right. It's like you get in a car accident and we can either amputate both your legs or you die. Well, where's the good decision?
Yeah.
So, we don't live in a black and white world. And it's so, we're talking about politics, or we're talking about money, we're talking about raising kids, we're talking about spirituality. We live in a messy world, and it's not that simple to say, I'll vote for this person, I'll vote for this person. And the challenge with this generation, which is the most brilliant generation in the history of the world, this is the most brilliant, most I call this is the Imagineering generation.
Yeah.
They know more than any generation in the history of the world, the average person.
Yep.
And have knowledge at their fingertips that, just 30 years ago was unheard of.
Yep.
And yet this is the most entitled generation in the history of the world.
Yeah.
There are more opportunities now. Like, I will say this in contrast to what you just said, because I agree with it 100%.
Yeah.
On the other side of that, there are more opportunities now if you take ownership.
Oh, 100%.
And you want to work hard and you're willing to take some level of risk.
And work hard,
than
100%.
Ever in history. Mm-hmm. But the challenge is that we have this, we have been taught this concept that the government is supposed to take care of us. And now we're moving towards socialism.
Yeah.
And which, we let me just say this, we're partly socialist country. We don't have to say we are, but I mean, we have government roads, we have government schools, we have,
right.
But we're talking about pure socialism.
Yeah.
Where basically the government takes my money and they give it back to me.
They fix your wages.
Fix my wages. They tell me what I can charge.
Yeah.
And they force me to give my money to places I don't want to give to.
It's not far off from that.
No, we're moving that direction. And it's because, Uncle Sam has become our father. Mm-hmm. And we're accustomed to the government, the entitlements, the government entitlements. Like, so, I don't even know how to take care of myself. And I'll put a plug in right now for this part too. We live in the most fatherless generation in America.
Yeah.
The most fatherless generation in the history of our country. in the 200-year history of our country in which our fathers are alive, but they aren't home. 71% of African-American families the kids are born out of wedlock. 52%, when you add up all the ethnic groups, 52% of all American kids are born without a dad. So who's raising these kids?
Yeah.
So, you just think about it. If you don't have a dad, you don't have somebody who's tasked with providing for you, you look for government subsidies. Whether it's your mom works and the government subsidizes her babysitting, or, she's whatever, or transportation. I mean, how does she get to work when she's got 3 kids? I mean, she's doing her best.
Yeah.
And we just don't know how to live without that institution. I remember I was coming out of Romania. I'll tell this story real quick.
No, you're good.
I was in Romania 10 years after the Iron Curtain fell. And I was in a taxi with a young man was driving taxi. He's probably 20. And so he would have been 10 when they came out of communism. And I said, and he spoke really broken English. And I said, how do you like the freedom you have? And he looked at me like I was crazy. He goes, in broken English, he said, freedom. Now I have work to work, have to find job.
No, man.
I don't know how to live like this. Raised in communism, dictator, killed hundreds of thousands of Christians, finally gets overthrown by his own military. And the people don't know how to live because never had to take care of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a book I've been reading. It's called The Changing World Order. You heard of that?
No.
Ray Dalio?
No.
Well, Ray Dalio is a multi-billionaire and super smart guy. And he has a big book, but he goes through the cycles of every single world power, the inflation, stimulus, government, interference, and he kind of just goes through these cycles. It's scary, the pattern of them all. It's not a fear-based book at all. It's more based on how to position yourself in the best possible way. And I'm on this section right now where he talks about the different types of governing models in the world, egalitarian versus aristocracy. Is that?
Yeah, aristocracy.
Okay, so that's technically what we are, correct?
Yeah, okay. It kind of like wealthy people rule the world.
Right. Okay, yeah. And then he talks about how, in China, because he's got a lot of friends in China, how it's he said the difference between an American and a person in China, as much as China gets a bad rap on the news right now, he said it as someone in China, their mindset, because of their culture and how it's governed, is always on the greater good, the greater of the collective. And he said, beautiful. Yeah, he said, as beautiful as America is, it's a bottom up mentality. So it's always about the individual. And he just talks about how everyone wants to blame the Federal Reserve, the federal government, for all these problems we're dealing with. But what they don't realize is that they are actually a part of the problem, because we're so individualistic about our needs, our wants, our feelings. It was really interesting. And where he's going with this book is there is a changing new world. There's a new world order that's coming at some point. And where we're at in our storyline in America, whether you agree with this or not, but it's the facts are there, is the next thing would be some sort of a military conflict, or some sort of a civil war. And it's just like, it's all factual. There's no emotions in what and he talks about why it has to happen, and the debt, and all the different reasons why these things have to happen every time they've happened. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I'd say there's a third option, and that's a great revival and reformation.
Yeah,
and revivals and reformations have changed culture many times because it changes people's view of themselves. It changes people's value system and what's important to them from the inside out. And
give me an example of one.
Well, you had the 1906 earthquake, and at the same time you had the 1906 Azusa Street revival. And, in the midst of a great crisis, when, 9/10 of San Francisco burnt down, simultaneously in the South, further south, you had a Azusa revival, and Pentecost broke out everywhere. The Jesus movement's another great example. People, the hippie movement and the degradation of drugs in my generation. This is the one I'm closest to, of course. And people were just losing hope because their kids were on drugs, and kind of like the LGBTQ movement. It was kind of like the cool thing to be and do, right? Whether I feel like I'm homosexual or not, it's like that's the in crowd. So that was the in crowd that it was like tune out and what do they call it? Tune in and tune out or something, and then the Lord touches the hippies, and all of a sudden the hippies are the ones who are leading the righteous life. And they start to have a completely different value system because they're counterculture. And many of the hippies, because it started in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. So we're talking about, the financial district. So many of the hippies grew up in wealthy homes, and all of a sudden, and part of the reason why they're on drugs is because of that first thing we talked about. Like their parents have figured out that it ain't money, but they don't know what it is, right? So these hippie kids, a lot of them are from, middle class and upper middle class homes. They're dropping out on drugs, and they find Jesus. And all of a sudden they start going back to their parents and say, hey, wealth isn't it. Money's not it. Here it is, So, that's the third option is the option I pray for. And I believe that I believe we're moving towards it. I believe we're at a tipping point in history, and we're moving towards it. And I think that, I think that humility is the way forward, because, arrogance and entitlements are actually about pride. It's about like someone owes me something. And, as you talk about the cycles of history, it's like the end of that is that I end up with nothing. The Great Depression. Right. You had the Roaring 20s, then you had the Great Depression, and you had, 2 world wars and the Korean War, and, and then you had the Great Depression, and, people, Americans, the world got the crap beat out of them.
I remember a lot of them have died now, but early in my career, I still had clients that were out of the Great Depression, and I mean, no matter what was going on, like they were so impressioned by that part of their life. It changed everything forever.
The government couldn't take care of you because the government collapsed. The whole economic system collapsed. I think you and I might have had this conversation. It feels like we did, but my grandparents never came out of the Great Depression. Like my grandmother hid money in her mattress till the day she died. Didn't trust the banks. Scraped mold off of bread even when they were middle class. Because that so impacted them. That there was literally no food. There was literally no job. They rationed rubber and tires and gasoline. And so there was, you couldn't turn to Uncle Sam because Uncle Sam was broke. And that changed them. And that's the other side of where we're heading. If we don't have a great revival that becomes a reformation that changes us from the inside out, that's where we're heading. I feel like, I'll say I feel like we're in a new era, and that's the tipping point. But the beginning of it, we're seeing right now. I know this is off subject, but
no,
we're seeing the first part of it is a sanctifying yourself. It's sanctify yourself because tomorrow God's about to do wonders. And so, we're seeing leaders that have fallen 20 years ago, spiritual leaders even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that never came out. All of a sudden, God's like, okay, it's time. It's consecrate yourself because tomorrow God's about to do miracles. And I believe that God is pulling generations of wickedness out of the church and out of culture.
Yeah.
And
I'm seeing it.
And it's still, I'll tell you, we got another couple of years of it from what the Lord talks to me about.
I'm seeing it though. I've seen so many high level financial influencers become so much more bold about their faith publicly right now. And I just, I think as things get evil, the line's being drawn and people are starting to realize like, I'm going to have to stand for something. And I just see it. It's a trend I've been seeing in the secular world is, there's a lot of people leaving church. The numbers aren't good. Church is the numbers are going down, but then there's all these powerful people that are starting to stand up.
Yeah, and the Lord is cleansing. He's consecrating culture. You see Epstein and all of this. I could be wrong about this part, but I don't think culture is getting wickeder. I think it's coming out of the closet.
Yeah,
I think it's because the Lord is driving it out of the closet, and it's so that He can forgive it, and so He can cleanse it, and that's our hope. Because the stock market's not going to save you. I'll say this: like, I think it's really important to vote. I said this in a preach a week ago. It's really important to vote. Like, if you don't vote, don't complain about it.
Yeah.
But I'm not looking for a king to save me.
No.
In the Old Testament, when Samuel the prophet was the leader of the country also, and his two sons were wicked, and the elders of Israel said, "Man, we don't want these guys to rule us," and they asked for a king. They said, "We want a king like other countries." And the Lord's response is very interesting. Samuel said, "God, what do you want me to do?" And God said, "They haven't rejected you, but they've rejected me from being king over them." And it's like, I'm not looking for a king to save me. Trump, Queen, Kamala Harris, whoever, Biden. Like, I'm not looking for a king to save us. I don't think a king's going to save us. I think people are like, they're looking for a king. Like, someone's going to save us. I don't think that's true.
No, I don't think so either. And I think that there's a lot of people right now who are very distracted by that. And it's easy to do. If you're consuming too much news and media, and I mean, all you have to do right now is go on Facebook, and every other post is about the Olympics, is about how unfair the boxing match was where a man beat up a woman. And I get it, but it's just like, man, so many people are so distracted by that stuff right now. And like you said, taking care of what's going on in here and here, like that's the greatest good I will have with my family, with the people around me. The most change I will have will be making sure that I'm taking care of this.
Yeah. There's a great story. I'm writing a book right now, and I just read and then repeated that story. John Rockefeller, Sr., and he was 53 years old, and his net worth in today's value would be $336 billion. So it would make him the richest
by far
person ever.
Yeah, almost by double.
And when he was 53 years old, all he could eat was crackers. He was so sick. Went to see his doctor, went to see multiple doctors, and they all said, you're not going to live to be 54. And so he thought, well, I can't take it with me. He was a nominal Christian, and he just started giving away his money. Just giving it away. He gave hundreds of millions of dollars to the Baptist church. He gave hundreds of millions to the poor. He invested hundreds of millions of dollars in medical cures. Actually, I was thinking the cure for I think yellow fever, cure for penicillin came from his research, and he lived to be 96.
Wow!
And when he started giving away money, when he just like, okay, money's not the answer, and he started being generous and actually living for what he was born for, suddenly his whole physique turned on. He hadn't slept in years. And at 53, and at 54, his insomnia was gone. And it's something about serving God by serving people, whether you're wealthy or poor, like giving yourself to other people, giving yourself fully to God. And it's there's a lot of people that they're their own God and they're their own higher power. It's really hard to be all responsible when you're not all powerful.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I spend time with like a lot of people, and when I was in AA rooms, one of the things that people learn when they go into recovery is that you have to have a God in your life.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of guys and gals that struggle with that, and they'll say, oh, I had religious abuse, or, all these different things. And I was telling a group the other day, I said, you know what the truth is? I said, the truth is, it ain't fun being accountable to something more powerful than me. I was like, that is a hard thing to do. Who wants to have a boss? I was like, that for me took almost dying before I was willing to say uncle and surrender. And, but man, on the other side of that is the greatest life you could ever have, the greatest peace, joy. It doesn't mean things are going to be easy. Oftentimes it gets harder. But man, I don't want to run my life anymore. I had a friend, I'll end on this, the other day. I was telling him some of the stories I shared with you the other day about what's going on in the business world, just a really cool breakthrough. And he said, he hadn't seen me for a while. He's like, how's your ego? I got friends that ask me those things. I'm so grateful for that. Right?
Yeah.
And I said, man, it's great. You know why? I said, because I know I'm so unqualified to be doing what I'm doing right now. I said, but I honestly sometimes feel unstoppable because honestly, it's just because of God.
Yeah.
And I just, and I've become so much more comfortable with that, because I get on these calls every now and then. 2 weeks ago, I was on calls with guys who are Yale and super, smart guys. And I barely graduated high school, and, Yale and Harvard graduates with MBAs, all these degrees and letters and numbers behind their names. And these are big Wall Street guys. And I get on this call and they ask me questions, and I was so comfortable. I said, well, I really don't know what you're talking about. Can you simplify that for me? And they really appreciated it.
Yeah.
It was really cool to be on that call. But man, Kris, I'm so grateful to be hanging with you. I appreciate the conversation. We went all over the place, but I think there was a lot of, no, it's okay.
I was chasing that one. That I'm responsible for that.
No. I'm glad we did. I didn't actually have a plan. Those are all things that people are thinking about right now.
Yeah.
And if they're not thinking about it, I think they should be.
Yeah.
So I'm glad
I agree.
Yeah.
And I was reading a verse this morning, and here's my ending.
Okay.
Don't worry about tomorrow, Jesus said.
Yeah.
It's Matthew 6, because each day has enough trouble of its own. I love that verse because it doesn't sound like Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And don't worry about tomorrow, because each day has enough trouble of its own. You can spend a lot of energy worrying about something that never happens.
Mm-hmm.
And the worst things that ever happened in my life, I never even thought about.
Yeah.
So I think, trust in the Lord for me is the secret of how I've come out of a nervous breakdown 15 years ago and live in peace now.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't exchange that for any amount of money, power, or fame.
Amen. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.